Eleonora. From this month forward, all of your pension checks will be deposited directly into my account. Those were the words my son, Julian, spoke on that gray Thursday afternoon. He stirred his coffee in my kitchen, the spoon clinking softly against the porcelain, as if he were merely commenting on the weather, as if he were doing me some profound favor, as if, at 64 years old, I had suddenly become incapable of managing the very money I had spent a lifetime earning. I said nothing. For several heartbeats, I just stared, searching his face for a flicker of the boy I had raised alone, the child I had shielded from the world with my own body, the man I had built from the sweat of my labor. I was searching for an explanation, a trace of doubt, anything. I found nothing. There was only his placid smile, the unsettling confidence of someone who has already factored in your compliance. I took a slow breath, the air feeling thin and cold in my lungs, and I told him yes, that it sounded fine, that, of course, I trusted him. Julian's smile widened, a mechanical stretching of the lips that didn't reach his eyes. He stood, leaned over, and pressed a dry, fleeting kiss to my forehead, a gesture of ownership, not affection. "It's for the best, Mom," he murmured, his voice laced with a condescending reassurance. He said I wouldn't have to worry about a thing, that he would handle everything, that it was for my own good. For my own good. The words hung in the stale air long after the sound of his car faded down the street, clinging to the walls like a toxic mist. That same night, as was his custom, Julian returned. It was Friday. He was never alone on Fridays. He arrived with his wife, their arrival announced by the scrape of the key I had given him turning in my lock. He came expecting the familiar comforts, the aroma of a hot meal, the table meticulously set, the guarantee of free food, a ritual he had claimed as his due every Friday for 3 long years. I heard their footsteps on the porch. I heard the door swing open. And then, I heard the scream. It was not a scream of fear. It was a high-pitched, desperate wail of profound inconvenience. The sound of someone confronting a reality they had not authorized. The sound of someone realizing, in a sudden, sickening drop, that the world was no longer revolving around them. I remained seated in my wooden chair, in the cavernous silence of my empty kitchen, in my empty house. I listened as that single, ugly sound echoed off the bare walls. I did not move. I did not go to see what was wrong. I already knew. Julian burst into the kitchen, his face a mask of pale disbelief, his eyes wide and frantic. His wife, Alana, hovered behind him, her perfectly painted mouth agape, mirroring his shock. "Mom!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Mom, what did you do? Where is everything? Where is the furniture? The television? Where is everything?" I looked at him, and a strange, cold calm washed over me, a stillness I didn't recognize in myself. I found my voice, and when it came, it was softer than a whisper, yet it seemed to fill the room. "I sold a few things," I said, my gaze level with his. "I needed the money. After all, if you're going to be managing my finances, I thought I should ensure I had some liquidity first." His face transformed. The pallor vanished, replaced by a sudden, violent crimson. Shock evaporated, leaving only pure, unfiltered rage. He took a step toward me, his hands clenched at his sides, and in that instant, for the first time in my 64 years, I saw my son for what he truly was. Not the boy I remembered, not the man I had proudly watched walk across a graduation stage, but this, a stranger. A furious, entitled stranger whose eyes burned with contempt and something else, something that looked terrifyingly like hatred. "You're crazy," he hissed, the words sharp as glass. "You're completely insane. How could you sell everything without asking me? What are we supposed to do when we come over now? How are we going to be comfortable here?" That was the sentence. The one that severed the final, frayed thread of my denial. How are we going to be comfortable here? Not, "Are you okay, Mom?" Not, "What's wrong?" His concern was not for the woman who had just liquidated her life, but for the loss of his weekly comfort. My home was not my sanctuary. It was his amenity. Alana glided forward then, her eyes, which I had always found cold, now looked calculatingly reptilian. "You're being selfish, Eleonora," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "Only thinking about yourself. We come here every single week to keep you company, to make sure you're all right, and this is how you repay us? Selfish." Me. The word hung in the air, an absurdity so profound it was almost comical. I, the woman who had worked double shifts for 2 decades so Julian could attend a private university. The woman who had sworn off any chance of a new life after his father vanished, terrified a stepfather might disrupt his world. The woman who had lived in cramped apartments, worn threadbare clothes, and eaten rice and beans for a month straight just so he could have the right sneakers. I was the selfish one. Julian just stared at me, his brow furrowed, as if I were a complex equation he couldn't be bothered to solve. And then, he delivered the final blow, the one that broke something deep inside me. "Maybe suggesting the bank account was a mistake," he said, his voice turning cold and clinical. "Maybe you're not in a condition to be making sound decisions. Maybe you need more help than I thought. More help. Control." He was painting me as a burden, an incapable old woman who needed to be managed. I rose from the chair. My body felt light, my bones hollow. I looked at these 2 people, these intruders in my empty home. "Dinner isn't ready," I said, my voice resonating with that new icy strength. "There is no dinner. If you're hungry, you can find somewhere else to eat." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Julian stared, uncomprehending, as if I had suddenly begun speaking in a dead language. Alana let out a short, bitter laugh and muttered something under her breath about gratitude. And then Julian said the words I still hear when I close my eyes, echoing in the dark. He said it with a coldness that was entirely new, a deliberate, sharp-edged weapon. "You should be careful, Mom. A woman your age, alone, without family who truly cares about her, could end up in a very bad place. I'm all you have. You should remember that before you do something else this stupid." They left. They stormed out, slamming the front door so hard I felt the vibration through the floorboards. I heard their car engine roar to life, the tires squealing as they pulled away. I stood alone in my empty kitchen, in my empty house, and I felt something inside me crack, a final, definitive break. But what flooded the void wasn't sadness. It wasn't despair. It was clarity. A terrible, blinding, and absolute clarity. My son did not love me. Perhaps he never had. I was, and had always been, a resource, a utility, a source of money, food, and convenience. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at the bare walls, at the ghostly outlines on the floor where my sofa and my television had once been things I had bought with my own labor. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I smiled. Because Julian didn't know the truth. He didn't know that I hadn't sold the furniture because I needed the money. I had sold it to send a signal, to rattle the cage, to see precisely how he would react. I had sold it to confirm the sickening suspicion that had been growing in my heart for years. And he had reacted exactly as I knew he would. Not with concern, but with possession. Not with love, but with rage. That night, surrounded by the shadows of my stripped bare life, I made a decision. I would not scream. I would not cry. I would not beg for the love I now knew was an illusion. I was going to do something far more powerful. I was going to observe. I was going to wait. I was going to let Julian believe he had won, that his threat had terrified me into submission. And then, when he was at his most confident, when he was most certain of his control, I was going to dismantle his world. I was going to show him, and his calculating wife, exactly who Eleonora Vance really was. Not the submissive mother, not the convenient utility, but the woman who had survived abandonment, poverty, and decades of relentless work. The woman he should never, ever have underestimated. There was a time I believed that motherhood was a currency, that the love I poured out would, by some universal law, be returned. That the daily grinding sacrifices were bricks, building an unbreachable fortress between my son and me. I was a fool. Julian was born on a blizzard night 36 years ago. His father, The man who had whispered promises of forever left when Julian was barely 2. He said he was finding himself. He said I would understand. I never did. But I didn't waste time waiting. I was left with a toddler, a third-floor apartment with drafty windows, and a secretarial job that paid just enough to starve slowly. It was never enough. So, I took a second job, cleaning corporate offices at night. I would leave Julian with my neighbor, Mrs. Genevieve Croft, a kind widow who watched him for a few dollars I couldn't spare. My days were a blur. 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the office. Rush home, feed Julian, bathe him, read him a story, put him to bed. Then, at 9 p.m., I would leave again, plunging my hands into other people's filth until 2 a.m. I slept for 4 hours. I did this for 16 years. I remember he wanted a specific pair of sneakers, a brand all the other kids had. They cost $150. My combined monthly income was $1,400. That $150 was our grocery budget for 2 weeks. I bought him the sneakers. I ate oatmeal and potatoes for an entire month, but my son walked into school with his head held high. When he turned 18, he wanted college, a private university with a $20,000 a year price tag. I didn't have $20,000. I didn't have $2,000. But I walked into a bank and signed a loan against my own future. I shackled myself to a debt that I only finished paying off 10 years later, long after he had graduated. He got a good job in finance, earning $4,000 a month right out of school. I was so proud. I thought, I've done it. He's safe. But Julian didn't leave. He said he needed to save, to build a solid foundation. My house was his house, I said. Stay as long as you need. He stayed for 5 more years. 5 years where I continued to work both jobs. 5 years where I paid the rent, the utilities, the food. 5 years where he saved every single penny of his salary, living entirely cost-free. When he finally moved out, it wasn't to a small apartment. It was to buy a $250,000 house in the suburbs. He paid cash. $250,000 in cash, saved while I clipped coupons. I told him I was proud. And I was. I thought I had done the right thing. I thought, now, maybe I can rest. Maybe I can drop the night job. It never happened. He married Alana 2 years later. The wedding cost $40,000. I sat at a table in the back, near the kitchen. Julian explained it was for important clients and networking. I smiled. I danced when I was told to. I went home alone, feeling a strange, hollow ache. After the wedding, the Friday night visits began. At first, I was thrilled. I thought he missed me. I would cook for days, his favorite dishes. But they never came to talk. They came to eat. They would arrive, sit, devour the food, check their phones, and leave, often within an hour. They never brought a thing. Not a bottle of wine, not a dessert, not $1 to help with the groceries. One night, after they left, I calculated the cost of the meal, $50. $50 I had to pull from my utility budget. I realized, with a cold sickness, that I had not become a mother again. I had become a free restaurant. The small cuts followed. When my car broke down, he was swamped at work. When my refrigerator began to die, he told me to just buy a new one, as if I had $800 lying around. The deepest cut was my 60th birthday. He arrived 2 hours late. No gift, no card. He ate a piece of the cake I had been forced to buy for myself and left 20 minutes later. I wept that night, a deep, ragged sobbing I hadn't allowed myself in years. I finally understood. I was no longer important. I was just available. And the worst part? I had allowed it. I had never demanded respect, never pointed out the imbalance. I was terrified that if I complained, if I asked for anything, he would disappear completely. The thought of losing him, even this hollow version of him, was a terror greater than my own degradation. So I remained the convenient mother, the silent mother, until that Thursday, when he came for my pension. And something, buried deep beneath decades of sacrifice, finally woke up. The following Monday, Julian returned, all business and smiles. He spread a sheaf of documents across my kitchen table. "Mom, this is simple. Just sign here, here, and here." They were the forms, he explained, to automate the transfer. "This way, I pay all your bills, you won't lift a finger." I picked up the papers. I read the fine print, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. It wasn't just access, it was a full power of attorney. It was total authority to open accounts, close accounts, make transfers, and make financial decisions on my behalf. "Julian," I said, my voice quiet, "this says you would have complete control." He nodded, unbothered. "Yes, it's just easier that way. For practicality?" "Practicality. For whom?" I held the pen he offered me. I was so close to signing. It was the motion I had practiced my entire life. Trust, release, give. But then I saw his face from Friday night. The fury, the threat. A woman your age could end up in a very bad place. I put the pen down. "You know, dear, give me a few days. I just want to read it all carefully, to be sure." A flash of irritation, so fast I almost missed it, crossed his features before the smile snapped back into place. "Mom, there's nothing to read. But fine. Take your days." He left the papers, a confident marker of his eventual victory. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I was at the bank when it opened. I asked the teller for my last 6 months of statements. She printed the pages. I checked them, line by line. And then I saw it. A withdrawal. $1,500. 3 months ago, I had never withdrawn $1,500. I asked the teller for details. She checked. It was withdrawn from a branch on the other side of the city, with my debit card. But my card was in my purse. It had always been in my purse. Except for one time. I remembered. 3 months ago, Julian had stopped by unannounced. I was in the shower. I'd yelled for him to come in. When I got out, he was waiting in the living room. My purse was on the coffee table. I had left to make coffee, leaving him alone with it for 5 minutes. I felt the bile rise in my throat. It could only mean one thing. He had taken my card, gone to an ATM, and put it back. He had stolen from me. I left the bank, the world tilting. But I didn't file a claim. Not yet. I needed to know the depth of the rot. I went home and pulled out the old shoebox from my closet, the one filled with old statements, medical bills, insurance papers, and I found it. 2 years ago, when I was hospitalized with pneumonia, someone had used my health insurance for a series of consultations I had never attended. Consultations that had maxed out my annual coverage, forcing me to pay for my own medications out of pocket. Then I found something else. A credit card statement, in my name, for a card I never applied for. It had a balance of $4,500. I called the company. The account was 18 months old. I asked for the purchase history, hardware emporiums, electronic stores, high-end furniture outlets. Julian had renovated his $250,000 house using my credit. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the paper evidence of his betrayal, and felt the very architecture of my life collapse. It wasn't just the money, it was the planning. The cold, methodical deception. He had been stealing from me for years, all while accepting my free meals, all while telling me I needed his help to manage my money. I wept until my eyes were dry. And then, I wiped my face, gathered the papers, and made a new decision. I would not confront him. Not yet. He would deny it. He would call me confused, senile. He would twist it until I doubted my own sanity. No. I was going to be smarter. I was going to collect proof. I was going to build a case so solid, so irrefutable, that it was indestructible. That Friday, Julian and Alana arrived, as if nothing had happened. They expected the empty house to have been a momentary lapse, a tantrum I had gotten over. But this time, I had cooked. I had made his absolute favorite, the chicken casserole I used to make when he was small and sick, the dish that wordlessly said, "I love you." They sat, they ate, they talked about their work, a movie they'd seen. I watched him. He ate my food, the food of his childhood, with the same vacant indifference he would give a fast food burger. No gratitude. No love. Just the mechanical act of consumption. When he was finished, he wiped his mouth and pushed the bank papers across the table, right next to his empty plate. Mom, your days are up? You've thought about it. Sign? I looked him dead in the eye. I'm still not sure, Julian. I need more time. Alana scoffed. Patricia, this is ridiculous. He's trying to help you. Why are you being so distrustful? Distrustful. She was right, but not in the way she imagined. Julian stood up, the mask of the caring son gone. His expression was hard. Mom, this is for your own good? You can't manage this alone? Look at the irrational decisions you're making. Irrational. Selling my own things was irrational. Stealing from his mother, apparently, was not. I held his gaze until he looked away. They left that night without another word. And I sat in my kitchen, staring at the unsigned papers, knowing that a silent war had just begun. The days that followed were defined by a new, heavy silence. Julian didn't call. He didn't visit. He was punishing me with his absence, confident that my loneliness would break me, that I would crawl back and sign his papers just to feel his presence again. He miscalculated. For the first time, the silence in my house didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like clarity. It felt like a war room. I spent those days digging, and the deeper I went, the darker it became. I discovered that 3 years ago, when he'd lost his ID and borrowed mine to pick up an urgent package, he had used it to open an electricity account in my name. For his house. For 3 years, his utility bills were tied to my credit. When a payment was late, my credit score took the hit. This was why I had been denied a small loan for car repairs last year. It wasn't just theft, it was sabotage. I called the utility company. I told them it was fraud. The woman on the phone told me I would have to file a sworn statement. Identity fraud. Committed by my own son. The next morning, I did something I had never done. I went to see a lawyer. A small office downtown. Mr. Eris Thorne, attorney at law. I walked in feeling like a fool, a 64-year-old woman tattling on her child. But Mr. Thorne, a man with kind eyes and a sharp suit, listened without a single flicker of judgment. I told him everything. The $1,500, the $4,500 credit card, the insurance, the electricity bill, the papers Julian wanted me to sign. When I finished, he leaned back and sighed. Mrs. Vance, what you're describing is a systematic pattern of financial elder abuse and fraud. If you sign those papers, you are not getting help. You are handing him a loaded weapon, and you will have no legal recourse when he empties your accounts. The words hit me like stones. What can I do? First, he said, you sign nothing. Second, you report the fraud on the card and the utility. Third, you go to your bank today and change every password, PIN, and account number you have. Fourth, you should consider a restraining order. A restraining order against Julian. The idea was grotesque. I don't want to get him in legal trouble, I whispered. He's my son. Mr. Thorne looked at me with a profound, weary compassion. Mrs. Vance, your son is in legal trouble. He has committed multiple felonies. The only question is whether you want to protect yourself. I left his office with a folder of forms and a spine made of steel. I went directly to the bank. I changed everything. I filed the formal fraud dispute on the credit card. I felt exhausted, but lighter. That night, Julian finally called. His voice was tight. Mom, we need to talk. Come to my house for dinner tomorrow. We have to sort this out. It was a command, not an invitation. The old me would have obeyed. I can't tomorrow, Julian, I said. I'm busy. A sharp silence. Busy? Busy with what? This is important. Maybe for you, I said. I have other things. You're acting very weird, Mom. You need to stop being stubborn and sign those papers. It's for your own good. Those words again. The trigger. Lawrence, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. I'm not signing anything. And I think we need to have a very serious conversation. About what? His voice was cautious now, wary. About $1,500 that vanished from my account. About a $4,500 credit card I never applied for. About an electricity bill in my name at an address where I have never lived. The silence that followed was absolute, so total I could hear the static on the line. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally stammered. I think you do. And you need to think very carefully about your next words. Mom, you're delusional, he snapped, defaulting to his script. You're getting confused. Maybe you need to see a doctor. There it was, the senility card. I'm not confused, Julian. I have all the papers, I have all the proof, and I've already spoken with a lawyer. Another silence. This one was different. It was heavy with panic. You, a lawyer? His voice was a whisper. Yes. And he explained in very clear terms what fraud and identity theft mean. You can't be serious. I'm your son. Everything I did was to help you. Help me? You stole from me, Julian. You used me. You lied to me. I would never. You did, I interrupted. And you know it. The only question now is what we're going to do about it. I heard his breathing, ragged and fast. I'm coming over, he said, his voice hard. We're talking now. No, I said. You are not. If you want to talk, we can do it with our lawyers present. You're crazy, he roared, the panic turning to rage. Completely crazy. After everything I've done for you, all the times I came to see you, all the times you came to eat, I corrected him. Where were you when I needed you, Julian? I hung up the phone. I sat in the dark, trembling, not with fear, but with the volcanic release of decades of suppressed rage. I had finally found my voice. The next morning, I woke with a singular purpose. I went to my savings bank, the one account he didn't know about, and withdrew my entire life savings, $8,200. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I opened a new account at a different bank across town, under new passwords. I went to the utility company and filed the fraud affidavit. I went to the credit bureau and filed a dispute on a $7,000 personal loan I found had also been taken out in my name 2 years prior. Then, I went to my neighbor, Mrs. Genevieve Croft. I told her everything. She listened, her face grim, and then took my hand. I knew it, Eleonora. I saw how they treated you, like a servant. I need a favor, I said. I need you to be my witness. If he comes here, if he tries to say I'm senile, I need you to confirm that I am not. Of course, she said, and I'll do you one better. She went to her desk and came back with a key. My door is open. If you ever feel unsafe, you come straight here. I gave her a sealed envelope containing copies of all my proof and Mr. Thorne's card, with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. I was prepared. I was ready. On Wednesday, they came. I saw their car pull up. I heard the insistent, angry ringing of my doorbell. I opened the door, but blocked the threshold with my body. We need to talk, Julian said. He tried to push past me. We can talk right here, I said. This is ridiculous, Patricia, Alana sneered. Stop acting like we're enemies. You're not enemies, I said, my voice flat. Enemies are honest. You're thieves who hide behind smiles. Julian's face went purple. How dare you? After everything I've done. I have the records, Julian. I cut him off. I have the proof. I know exactly how much you've stolen. I know about the cards, the loans, the utilities. I know everything. You have 2 options. You repay every single cent, or I go to the police and file criminal charges for fraud. You wouldn't, his wife whispered, her face pale. He's your son. That's what makes it unforgivable, I said. Julian finally exploded. It wasn't a defense, it was a diatribe. You owe me, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. I grew up without a father because of you. I watched you work yourself to death. That was your fault. You chose to have me. I didn't ask to be born. His words landed like physical blows, but they didn't hurt. I saw them for what they were, the hollow justifications of a cornered animal, trying to shift the blame for its own savagery. "You're right, Julian," I said softly. "I chose to have you, and for 36 years I gave you everything. That didn't give you the right to steal from me." "I didn't steal. I just took what was owed to me." "Nothing was owed to you." Alana grabbed his arm. "Let's go, Julian. It's not worth it. She's lost her mind." They left, stumbling down the stairs. I closed the door, and the click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The days that followed were defined by a new kind of warfare. Julian, having failed to intimidate me in private, took his campaign public. He began posting on his social media. Vague, mournful posts about family challenges and the pain of being misunderstood. Then they escalated. A photo of him and Alana at a lavish restaurant, celebrating the release of toxic energies and surrounding ourselves only with people who bring value. I was the toxic energy. Another photo of him at the gym, with a long caption about investing in oneself before helping others, ironic, given he'd used my fraudulent credit card to pay for that gym. The comments were a flood of sympathy. "So brave. Setting boundaries is hard. We support you." The final, devastating betrayal came on a Friday, the night he would have been at my table. He posted an old photo of us. I was holding him as a toddler, both of us smiling. The caption was a masterpiece of manipulation. He wrote about how sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you. About how he had learned that love does not mean tolerating abusive behavior. About his difficult decision to distance himself from a toxic family relationship for his own mental health. He had taken our story, my sacrifice, and inverted it. He cast himself as the victim and me as the monster. He wasn't just stealing my money, he was stealing my entire history. I watched this digital theater, this public execution of my character, and I felt not anger, but a chilling resolve. He was playing a game he thought he could win, because he thought I would be shamed into silence. I went back to Mr. Thorne. The bank investigations had finished. The total, including the loans, cards, and cash, was over $22,000. "We can send a private demand letter," Mr. Thorne advised. I thought about it. A private letter. An opportunity for him to apologize, to make it right, to save face. But I looked at the printout of his social media post, the one where he called me an abuser. I knew, with absolute certainty, that he would not see a private letter as grace. He would see it as weakness. He would see it as a negotiation, another chance to manipulate. "No," I said. "No private letters. I want to file a formal civil lawsuit. Today, I want it to be a public record." "Mr." Thorne raised an eyebrow, then nodded slowly, a small smile of respect on his face. "As you wish, Mrs. Vance." Julian was served on a Thursday. Less than an hour later, my phone began to scream. Call after call. I let them all go to voicemail. I listened to them later. The first message was panicked. "Mom, this is a terrible misunderstanding. Call me. We can fix this." The second was pleading, "You're ruining my life. Please. Think about what you're doing. You're destroying your son." By the fifth message, the pleading was gone, replaced by the familiar rage. "You're going to regret this. I have lawyers. They'll prove you're senile. You'll be the villain in this, I swear to God." He tried to control the narrative online, posting a long, vague statement about being legally attacked by a confused family member. But this time, his words were useless. Because a civil lawsuit is public, and the court filing contained everything: the dates, the account numbers, the dollar amounts, the irrefutable, itemized list of his fraud. His facade crumbled. His own lawyers, upon seeing the evidence, told him he had no defense. The public documents were found by his friends. The neighborhood gossip mill, fueled by Mrs. Croft, ignited. People who had sent him support were now seeing the truth. His wife, I heard, was ballistic, not at his theft, but at the social humiliation. The settlement negotiation was swift. He had no leverage. His only option was to avoid a public trial and the criminal charges that would inevitably follow. Mr. Thorne informed me they had agreed to all terms: full repayment of the $22,000, plus $5,000 in damages and all my legal fees. But I had one final condition. One clause he fought harder than the money. He had to issue a public statement on the same social media he had used to slander me, admitting to the fraud. The post appeared on a Tuesday. It was brief, sterile, and clearly drafted by lawyers. But the words were there. An admission of unauthorized access to bank accounts, of opening lines of credit without permission, and of serious errors in judgment that he deeply regretted. The digital world he had built exploded. The payments began arriving in my new bank account, punctually, every month. He knew a single missed payment would invalidate the agreement and activate the criminal case. And with that money, I bought a plane ticket. I spent 64 years living for someone else. Now, for the first time, I was living for me. I sold the empty house and bought a small cottage in a coastal town 3 hours away. A place he would never find. It had a small yard where I finally planted the garden I had always wanted. Julian called one last time after the final payment was made. His voice was small, hollow. He asked if we could ever talk, if reconciliation was possible. I listened to the silence on the line, and then I spoke. The son I raised, Julian, either never existed or he died a long time ago. He was replaced by a stranger I do not know and do not wish to know. I hope you find peace in your life, but you will do it far away from me. I have closed that door, not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation. He made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that might have been a sob, and hung up. I live in my small house by the sea now. I drink coffee in my garden and watch my flowers grow. There is a peace here I never knew existed. I finally understood that true love cannot exist where respect is absent. I learned that sacrifice is not a virtue if it demands your annihilation. Setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, it is a necessary act of survival. Protecting your peace is not selfishness. It is the highest form of wisdom. I closed the door on my son, not as an act of revenge, but as an act of dignity. I did not win by becoming his enemy. I won, simply, by refusing to remain my own victim.